Have you ever heard someone say, things just aren't like they used to be? Every generation seems to believe the world is changing too quickly. New technology appears, young people dress differently, music changes, politics become more polarized, religious beliefs seem challenged, immigration increases, new ideas spread faster than older generations can understand. Sound familiar? Today, we might be talking about artificial intelligence, social media, smartphones, or self driving cars. But 100 years ago, Americans were saying almost exactly the same things. Welcome to the 1920s. The decade is often remembered as the Roaring Twenties, a time of jazz music, flappers, gangsters, automobiles, Hollywood, and economic prosperity. Those images are certainly part of the story, but they only tell half of it. Beneath the excitement, the United States was wrestling with some fundamental questions. What does it mean to be an American? Who belongs? How much should government regulate the economy? Should society embrace modern science or traditional religion? How much should technology reshape everyday life? Those questions define the 1920s, and many of them continue to shape American politics and culture today. As the American Yawp emphasizes, the decade was not simply an era of prosperity, but one of profound social, cultural, and political transformation. Setting the stage, America after World War I. Before we dive into the decade itself, let's remember where America had just been. The United States had emerged from World War I as the world's leading industrial power. Europe was devastated. Millions had died. The American economy had expanded dramatically. Factories that once produced military equipment now shifted toward consumer goods. At the same time, Americans were exhausted. They had experienced war. They had endured the influenza pandemic. Workers had gone on strike. There had been the first Red Scare. Many Americans simply wanted stability. That desire explains why Republican candidates dominated national politics throughout the 1920s. Warren G. Harding promised a return to normalcy. Calvin Coolidge emphasized limited government and support for business, and Herbert Hoover inherited what many believed was an unstoppable economy. Republican administrations generally favored lower taxes, reduced regulation, and policies that encouraged business expansion. Notice something important here. The federal government did not disappear. Instead, it changed priorities. Progressive reform had expanded government during the early 20th century. The 1920s shifted attention away from regulation and toward encouraging private enterprise. This is one of the recurring patterns in American history. Government rarely becomes simply big or small. Instead, Americans argue about what government should actually do. We still have those debates today. Should government regulate emerging technologies? Should it regulate artificial intelligence? Should it regulate cryptocurrency? Should it intervene in housing markets? The questions are remarkably similar, even if the technology has changed. The business of prosperity. The 1920s are often remembered as one of America's great economic booms. Industrial production expanded, wages generally increased, stock prices climbed, new industries flourished, electricity spread rapidly into homes and businesses, automobiles became affordable for millions of Americans. By the end of the decade, many families owned products their grandparents could never have imagined. Think about how quickly artificial intelligence has entered everyday life over the past few years. Now imagine that same speed of technological change, but instead of AI, it was electricity. Suddenly, homes had refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, electric irons, washing machines, radios, telephones, electric lights. These innovations fundamentally changed daily life. The automobile represented perhaps the greatest transformation. Henry Ford's moving assembly line had dramatically reduced production costs, making automobiles affordable to ordinary Americans rather than just the wealthy. As automobile ownership expanded, entirely new industries emerged. Gas stations, repair shops, motels, roadside restaurants, billboards, suburban housing developments, and tourism. Sound familiar? Today, economists often discuss the AI economy. In the 1920s, Americans were living through the automobile economy. Technology wasn't simply creating new products, it was reorganizing how people lived, where they worked, where they shopped, even who they dated. Young couples suddenly had privacy that previous generations rarely experienced. Cars literally changed American courtship. The rise of consumer culture. Here's where chapter 22 becomes especially relevant. America wasn't simply producing more goods. Businesses had to convince people to buy them. That may sound obvious today, but it represented a major shift. Before industrialization, most Americans purchased only what they truly needed. Now factories could produce far more than consumers naturally demanded, so businesses began creating demand. Advertising exploded, department stores expanded, brand loyalty developed, credit purchasing became increasingly common. Instead of asking, "What do I need?" Americans increasingly asked, "What do I want?" Advertising executives learned something important. People don't buy products simply because they work. They buy products because those products promise something: status, convenience, beauty, success, popularity. Sound familiar? Scroll through Instagram, watch YouTube advertisements, browse Amazon. Notice how rarely advertisements simply describe the product. Instead, they're selling a lifestyle. That idea largely emerged during the 1920s. As consumer expert Christine Frederick argued, businesses increasingly focused on understanding consumer psychology rather than simply manufacturing goods. Department stores transformed shopping into an experience through displays, restaurants, fashion shows, and customer services designed to make buying enjoyable rather than merely practical. One historian famously summarized Marshall Field's department store by saying it became a joy to buy. Think about modern shopping malls, Apple stores, Tesla showrooms, Disney, even Costco. They're carefully designed experiences. That idea isn't new. Its roots reach back over a century. Consumption becomes entertainment. Another major shift occurred during this decade. Shopping became entertainment. Department stores weren't just places to purchase clothes, they became destinations. Families spent entire afternoons there. Large window displays attracted crowds. Restaurants encouraged shoppers to stay longer. Fashion shows promoted the newest styles. Businesses realized that the longer customers remained inside the store, the more likely they were to spend money. Modern retailers still use exactly the same strategy. Ever notice how IKEA forces customers through a carefully planned route? Or how Costco places impulse purchases near the checkout? Or how online retailers constantly recommend additional products? Those marketing strategies evolved from principles businesses refined during the consumer revolution of the early 20th century. By the end of the 1920s, Americans increasingly defined success through consumption. Owning things became part of personal identity. That shift remains one of the defining characteristics of modern American society. So far, we've looked at the political and economic foundations of the 1920s. Republican leadership encouraged business growth. Technology transformed everyday life. Consumer culture reshaped how Americans thought about success and happiness. But the story of the 1920s isn't just about economics. It's also about culture. In part two, we'll explore how jazz, Hollywood, sports heroes, radio, automobiles, and changing social values created an entirely new American culture. We'll also begin examining why many Americans celebrated these changes, while others feared that the nation was losing its traditional identity, a conflict that will eventually lead us into the culture wars, the Scopes trial, and the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan later in the chapter.